This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I put a section in my book, Trend Commandments, called The Cheat Sheet, and I opened it up with this quote: "Golf is not safe. My grandfather died playing golf. Speaking up is not safe. People might be offended. Innovation is not safe. You'll fail, perhaps badly." Now that we've got that out of the way, what are you going to do about it? Hide, crouch in a corner, and work as hard as you can to fit in? That's not safe either. Might as well do something that matters instead. End quote. This might be my last podcast before December 25th, before Christmas. I think it probably will be. So the point of this cheat sheet was to just give some overviews of trend following. And I just want to run over these really quick. I'm just going to read them. Boom, boom. Profit in up and down markets. No brainer, right? No more buy and hold. Analyst or news. Get rid of it. No prediction. The big money of letting profits run. Don't cut the trend short. Risk management. Top priority. Take advantage of mass psychology. I've got some great audio coming in this podcast from some assorted, very, very wise traders about mass psychology. A scientific approach to trading. Absolutely. Make it mechanical. Use price data. Strong historical performance during crisis periods. When the blank hits the fan, will you make money? Will you still be solvent? Will you be around? No traditional diversification. 60-40 bonds, stocks, all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, no good. Ride the horse that's winning. No government reliance. If you got to rely on the government, if you got to rely on Bernanke taking care of you, tucking you in, giving you a little kiss on the forehead. You know what? Bernanke, he could even give you a kiss on the, lips. If you're a good little boy or a good little girl, you never know. You never know. I'm not implying anything. I'm just slightly insane. Anyways, I have got some really interesting clips today, and these are some of the people that I've learned from, and these are little excerpts that I've kind of put aside that I've really liked. The first one is from William Eckhart. And for those not aware of Bill Eckhart and his work, I'm not going to tell you who he is. You figure it out. Anyways, this little clip is self-explanatory, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Over the last several years, I've been involved in the development of a theory of trading, a comprehensive theory of trading. Now, this is an attempt to begin with a few fairly evident first principles and by a chain of rigorous deductions to derive answers to questions about optimal procedures in trading. Now, the project is far from completed, but I believe that in its broad outlines, have emerged. What I'm going to try to do today is to isolate a single idea, essentially just one idea from this trading complex, and use it to formulate what I'm going to call an axiom that I think is going to be nearly self-evident, and I suspect that all of you will be inclined to agree with it. But from this axiom, I'm going to try to derive a variety of consequences. And I expect that at least some of you will agree with the axiom completely, maybe even think that it's trivially true and doesn't really require discussion, and then later be surprised to discover that you violated every trading day. Okay. Now, the idea is simple enough. It concerns what sorts of things are relevant to trading. Now, I'm going to mention 5, and I'm going to say that these are the only 5 things that are relevant to what makes an optimal trade. Well, this is the state of the market. The volatilities of the various markets. There's the amount of equity being traded. There's the person's system, or their trading orientation, let's call it. And then there's the risk aversion of the trader or the client. Now, I don't think I have to make the case that these are all important, but I'm going to suggest that these are the only things that have any importance, and I'm going to try to formulate this in the form of an axiom that I think is fairly evident. Here's the rule or axiom. If two traders who have the same equity, they have the same system or the same trading orientation, they have the same risk aversion, and they're both faced with the same situation in the market, well then for these two traders the optimal course of action should be the same. That's the axiom. It's kind of reminiscent of those axioms in Euclid, when equals are added to equals, the remainders are equal. It should be fairly obvious that if traders are this much alike, that whatever is optimal for one should be optimal for the other. Traders alike in all these respects should do the same thing.
So I just love that. I mean, he makes it so straightforward. It's very scientific. It's very rigid. That mentality that he just outlined, that is the foundation of being a trend-following trader. Next one. Someone that highly influenced me. I met him for the first time in 1996. This would be Bill Dunn, talking about risk management from his perspective.
We have serious risk management programs in place and always have, and our target to design a program is for each program to have a 1% probability of having to experience a loss of 20% or more in a 1 month period.
Just love that too. I just love that. Who actually says their goal is to lose 20% in 1 month, 1% of the time? That's his goal. That's actually his risk management. Let that sink in. I love it. I love it. My next excerpt that I've saved over the years, which I think is great, and I'm going to try and get him on the podcast soon, is Jerry Parker. Once again, if you're not familiar with Jerry, take a look at my second book, The Complete Turtle Trader. It's a really good little brief bit from Jerry about the difference between mean reversion and trend following.
Mean reversion works almost all the time, and then it stops and you're kind of out of business. So the market is always reverting to the mean, except when it doesn't. And then we're on board this big, huge trend, and these people lose a lot of money. So there's just two competing philosophies. Who wants a system like we have, 40% winners, losing money almost all the time, always in a drawdown, making money on about 10% of your trades. The rest of them are sort of break even to losers, infrequent profits. I'd much prefer the mean reversion, where I have 55% winners, 1 or 2% per month. I'm always right. I'm always getting positive feedback. My clients are always loving me. Then, every 8 years, you're kind of out of business, because when it doesn't revert to the mean, your philosophy loses.
What do you just double down, right? It'll come back.
And another point he made, which is really good, is that about money management. To some degree, you can't really separate trend following from money management, because it's just like Mike said. These people value people or mean reversion. Yeah, if you've got a nice loss in a trade, it's even better than when you put it on. So let's do more. I mean, why not? Intellectually, you've got to agree that we should even do more. Whereas with the CTA, buying strength, selling weakness, by mere definition, if a trade is a loss, it's a bad trade, and we're looking to get out. So we're fearful of losses when the rest of the world tends to be hopeful. And then when we have a big, huge trend and lots of profit, we're very hopeful that the market's going to keep going, and the rest of the world is very fearful that they're going to give it back.
So succinct, so clear, right? Such clear thinking. That's the way you need to be about your investing, your trading. Now, why does it become hard to accept such principles as Eckhart outlines, as Dunn outlines, as Parker outlines? Why is it so difficult for people to accept these principles, these ideas, these thoughts? They sound rational. They sound reasonable. That's where this podcast takes a turn. This podcast takes a turn to explain What drives us? My next excerpt is from Elizabeth Cheval. And Elizabeth is also in my second book, and I think her notion of chronocentricity is well worth the listen.
For most of our history on Earth, communications traveled at one speed, slow, until the invention of the telegraph, when overnight it became virtually instantaneous. It was the first time human beings communicated across a continent or an ocean in an instant. Can you imagine how disorienting it was for those living at the time? The telegraph was truly a bewildering and globe-shrinking revolution. The telegraph was the quantum leap in communications technology. Just 20 years later, the telegraph was made obsolete by the invention of the telephone. Now, a mere 150 years after the quantum leap, a nanosecond in human history, we are simply refining the tools. Our love affair with the Internet and our belief that it was history's biggest revolution in communications technology is an example of a specific flaw in our investment psychology, a phenomenon that scholars call chronocentricity. Chronocentricity is the psychological tendency for each generation to believe it sits on the cusp of history. Chronocentricity leads us to believe that what is happening to us is so important it will impact the world deeply and permanently, that it will define a new era. The reality is, at any given time, what is happening around us has happened over and over and over again throughout history. Look at how many times we've done this. Since financial history has been recorded, we have gone through bubbles, manias, panics, and crashes routinely. These are just the major ones. There are hundreds of smaller ones in between. And most of the big ones can be tied to the development of a new technology. The aqueduct in ancient Rome, the telegraph, the railroad, the steam engine, and so on, right up to our most recent tech boom. Why do we keep repeating the same mistake over and over? The short answer is our natural investment psychology. Let me also give you some academic references. In his short history of financial euphoria, the late great economist John Galbraith describes these relentless cycles of boom and bust. Galbraith attributes the non-stop cycle to the breathtaking brevity of the collective financial memory. Galbraith shows that about every 20 years, we conveniently and collectively forget pretty much everything that happened in the previous 20 years, unless it was a huge event like the crash of 1929, and then it takes us about 100 years or a generation to completely forget. This is the third aspect of our investment psychology that fails us. We're chronocentric, we're prone to new era thinking, and we have feeble financial memories. Hopefully you begin to see the defectiveness of our psychology. Many of us think we learned the lesson of the tech bubble because we learned something from our own trading experience, and we are convinced that we will never fall prey to a psychological market phenomenon again. But what I'm talking about is much larger than that. It's not about learning something from the tech bubble. It's about learning that we're incapable of learning anything from the tech bubble. We may have learned something in the short run, but we'll collectively forget it within 20 years. If you are not convinced that we are doomed to repeat the larger pattern, like every generation since the Roman Empire, consider this. In the same short essay, Galbraith identifies the essential features of a mania and outlines the repetitive pattern of these cycles throughout history. It's mind-numbing to study financial history because it is so repetitive. We don't do sort of similar things over and over. We do the exact same things over and over. We have followed this pattern in every major bubble, starting with coin mania in the Roman Empire. Tulip mania is my favorite example because it's just so zany. A period in the 17th century when tulip bulbs became an obsession in Holland. Bulbs were traded on an open market and supported by a paper credit market, virtually a futures market in tulip bulbs. Eventually, a single tulip bulb traded as high as 30 times the average annual wage in Holland at the time, 20 times the price of a small house, for a single tulip bulb. Now, surely we're more sophisticated than that, right?
Just great. Just great. I mean, that is exactly where we are. And if that is where we are, if that is the way of the human being, if that is the mind of the human animal, what can you do to benefit from it? What kind of strategy can you employ to make money in the face of all that, in the face of all that psychological baggage, all of that inherited genetic prison of us human beings that we exist in? How do you get around it? Let me jump ahead, though. I've got some more excerpts that I want to play. The next three are from David Harding. Let me play the first one.
The conference very interesting. I do find it very interesting. My modest interest is to collect more data, to have more data, more data for longer periods of history. I have personal and professional reasons for wanting to see that data, but I'm also just have academic curiosity. I really want to see 1825, proper illustration of the bubbles of 1825, and I can't find one anywhere, in any books, in any texts, and so on and so forth. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and that to me is worth money and effort. And I would just like to see that done on a larger scale. I feel that this is an underexploited theme in history. It's a lateral theme in history. The behaviour of people with respect to money, and how markets and mania. Well, I'm just wanting to update Charles Mackay. Charles Mackay wrote a book about manias, panics, and crashes, starting in market terms with the tulip mania and the South Sea bubble and these relatively well-known but still under-researched periods. But he included in that wider phenomenon like the Crusades, and one might include other wider phenomenon, like National Socialism in the 20th century. In other words, people have a tendency to herd and to believe things that aren't true and to follow one another and copy one another and follow fashion. And you're starting to move into big subjects, and the issue of financial markets, they just happen to be a very convenient laboratory for studying human behaviour. And my limited expertise is in markets and data and numbers.
I'm going to keep going and jump right in. Here's the second excerpt from David Harding.
This has all happened before. It's happened numerous times before. The amazing thing, if you read, for example, 19th century English literature, for example, I just finished reading The Way We Live Now, and you read about Melmoth, the collapse of the great financier, or you read about the end of Overend and Gurney, or the 1825 crisis, the railway crisis in 1845. These sorts of events have been played out before. The extraordinary thing is that the similarities between the event that is now taking place on a global level and the events that took place in a much smaller world 200 years ago. So, given that we have a relatively small number of data points to go on, I mean, Ben Bernanke, in managing this crisis, is focusing entirely on 1929, as though that's the only collapse there's ever been. And people talk about 1929. Well, it's dangerous to rely too much on one data point when you're dealing with something so important. There have been many other examples of financial crises in history, and this crisis resembles some of them more than it resembles 1929.
Now, this last one is slightly different. This is an excerpt where he was giving an interview, and I just love the good-natured way that he looks at trend following. The good-natured way of saying these basic philosophical principles that I've seen for decades, will they continue to work? Will they continue to work into the future?
The CTA industry, the futures industry, is dominated by people with systems, systemic trading. The fact is, when we did our research 20 years ago into various types of systems, we found that they worked, or at least back then we found that they had worked. It is not enough to say that because something has worked that it will go on working, but it is a matter of record that it has gone on working for the last 22 years, which has been time enough for me to set up AHL first, which is, provides the bulk of the Man Group's Profits, which is now one of the biggest companies in England, and then even the systems have worked well enough for me to leave that and start again from scratch and build another large company. So systems have worked amazingly well over the period, partly because the efficient market theory, which has been in such widespread belief, has been widely believed, partly because that says that they shouldn't.
I love it. I love anything that David Harding puts out there. I like the way he thinks. I like the way he thinks. I like the way all these guys think. I like the way Liz Cheval thinks. So I shouldn't just say the word guy. I like how these men and women think, these trend-following traders. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, Mike, these people all sound completely reasonable, rational, they're bright. Thank you for putting together this compilation of their views and their wisdom. It's a no-brainer. We should all go that way. Why don't we? We don't go that way because we haven't been trained to go that way. We've been put into school prisons. We've been put into dungeons that have stunted our ability to think. This next clip from Seth Godin outlines the educational system. It's the foundation for why all of the wisdom that I've played in this podcast so far is not accepted, is not taught. I want you to listen really carefully to what Godin says here. Great stuff.
And you talked about how you think the education process has really failed people. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I need to start by acknowledging that I am not a conspiracy theorist. I think most conspiracy theories are groundless. In this case, public education was a conspiracy between government and corporations. Corporations were petrified that two things would happen when factories started getting efficient. One, that they would run out of factory workers, because that would mean they'd have to pay people a lot. And two, that they would run out of people who wanted to buy stuff. That the typical person in 1880 had 2 pairs of pants and a pair of shoes, and that was it. The idea of consumer culture was not preordained, and it certainly didn't exist for the typical person prior to 1900. So public school was built intentionally by Andrew Carnegie and Woodrow Wilson and other people to do two things. Train people to become compliant factory workers, sit in straight rows, do what they're told, follow instructions. And two, teach kids that the best way to fit in and feel good was to buy stuff. And it's done a great job at both those things. And we're still doing it. And they still do it in Japan. And they still do it in a lot of other countries. They churn out people who await instructions, who can fill in with a number 2 pencil the circles in perfect ovals. But we don't churn out people who are creative and innovative and ask questions. We don't churn out people who interrupt. We don't churn out people who are, by almost any definition, artists. We actually shun those people. Well, we built an economy where there's a surplus of factory workers, where people in Detroit are unemployed and unhappy about it, and where there's a shortage of people who are willing to stand up and do something interesting and unique. School is a complete failure, and this idea that we're going to test our way out of it is bogus. Testing our way out of it is an oxymoron. It's the opposite of what we need to do. We need to essay our way out of it. We need to sketch our way out of it. We need to debate our way out of it, or quiz night our way out of it. But we're not going to be able to test our way out of it.
You know, it's interesting. I homeschool, and I have kids and I homeschool. And what you just said is basically why I homeschool, because I don't think the school does a good job of producing creative individuals. That's sort of the way I put it.
Yeah, I think that, your kids are really lucky to have you. I think that it wouldn't take very many passionate parents to start schools down the right path. I have pushed the public school where my kids go pretty hard. I've produced musicals there and gotten involved in classes and supported the outlier teachers to the point where it's a safer place for them to push kids to do stuff that's edgy. I've also, and I intend to do this on a larger level, worked hard to educate parents and kids that college is an even bigger scam than public school, and the application process to college is a joke. We ought to be encouraging kids not to do the sorts of things that get them into Harvard, but instead have them think really hard about why is it that they want to invest those $150,000 and what's the best way to do that. Because the whole paranoia that sets in among middle-class and upper-middle-class parents when kids hit high school is one of the things that keeps our public schools churning out automatons.
Well, I would say too the other big scam is trade schools or trade colleges, which I would say are even a worse scam than regular colleges, because it's
but at least they're telling the truth. They're saying, I'm going to get your job as an auto mechanic, and that's all you're going to know how to do. So there's no confusion there. One of the studies that I'm fond of showed that people who got into Harvard and didn't go ended up being as successful by any measure, happiness or money, as people who got into Harvard and did go. And once you look at a piece of data like that, it's really hard to figure out why they're pretending they're onto something, because they're not.
It's up to you. I mean, ultimately, that's the message of all the trend following traders that I've put on this podcast. It's ultimately the message of what Seth Godin is saying. It's up to you to find the information. If you want to just sit back and trust that the system will feed you, the system will take care of you, the system will clothe you, the system will diaper you, the system will use a wet wipe on your bottom to make you feel better. It's not going to happen, man. It just isn't going to happen. You've got to take care of yourself. And that means mentally. Work on those 6 inches between your ears. It's all about you. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, Trend Following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.